We're going to learn about integers today, but before we do that, we're going to take a look at whole numbers. What is a whole number? Well, if we look at these numbers, we got 1, 2, 3, and we got 47, 1,000, and 99. Now, as you think about this, what do they all have in common? First of all, they're all positive, right? Second, they're not decimals, okay? And they're not fractions. There's no square roots or anything next to them. So another way of defining a whole number is counting numbers. If you started at 1, then you went to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, eventually you'd get to all these numbers and you'd reach every whole number. So the difference between every whole number is 1 as you increase from 1, 2, 3, and so on. So that's what a whole number is. It's a counting number. 0 is not a whole number, okay? Because when you learn to start counting, you don't really start at 0, you start at 1. We'll talk about what 0 is in just a second. So what is a whole number? It starts with 1. It's always positive. The spaces between all the whole numbers are 1. We call them the counting numbers. Let's take a look at a list of integers. We have 3, 4, -7, 5, -102, and 0. What's the difference between a whole number and an integer? Well, if you're looking at this page, automatically you can tell that we have two negative numbers here, -102 and -7, and we also have 0. Now, there are no fractions and there are no decimals on this page, so that should give you a hint as to what an integer is. In just a second, we're going to take a look at the definition of integers, but let's take a look at a page that are not integers. 1/2 is not an integer. 3.7 is not an integer. Square root of 5, not an integer. Pi, not an integer. -3/5, not an integer. 97%, that's also not an integer. So all of these numbers are basically decimals, okay? 97% is 0.97, 1/2 is 0.5. Okay, so you can't have a fraction or a decimal. Pi is as a symbol, right? But it represents 3.14. Which is also a decimal. So an integer cannot be a decimal or a fraction. Here's a good definition or a page that describes integers. They're all the whole numbers plus the negative ones. Okay, integers can be negative or positive. They're also spaced by 1, except you basically start at 0 and you subtract 1 to get all the negative numbers, and then you add 1 to get all the positives. Integers do include 0. So that's it. That's the difference between whole numbers and integers. Whole numbers are only positive, not including 1. Integers are all the whole numbers plus 0 plus all the negative opposites. Every whole number has an opposite negative number. They are the same distance away from 0. Okay, for example, the number 6 is 6 spaces away from 0. But if you go the same 6 spaces to the left, you get -6. This is a good visual to help you see what the integers are. It's basically the number line without any decimals on it. Again, it includes 0. Integers increase from left to right, okay? So, a lot of times my students say, well, I forget what -1 minus 2 is or whatever. Just draw the number line out, okay? And the number line includes the integers on it. Most number lines, you can put decimals on it, but for the most part, a number line has the negatives, the positives, and 0. If you were doing -1 minus 2, you start at -1 and subtract 2 to get to -3. Number line is a great way to help you learn adding and subtracting numbers. So as we move from left to right, the numbers get bigger. Okay, -6, -5 is actually bigger than -6. You'd rather be $5 in debt than you would be $6 in debt, and so on and so forth. And of course, you get to 0, and that's bigger than all those negative numbers. You'd rather not have any money than be in debt, right? And then, of course, as we move to the right, it gets bigger and bigger and more positive. As we move to the left, the numbers get smaller. So -100 is smaller than -1. Again, being $100 in debt is a lot worse than being $1 in debt, right? And so as we move to the left, the numbers get smaller. I'm going to quiz you now. Which of the following are integers? All right, let's look at this first one, 4. Do you think that's an integer? If you said yes, you are correct. It's not a fraction. It's not a decimal. It's a whole number. Whole numbers are also integers. Okay. 5, 6. That is not an integer. Why? Because it's a fraction. And it can't be reduced anymore to a whole number. Okay, so therefore it is not an integer. Negative 500. If you said it's not a whole number, you are right, but it is an integer. Just think of 500, it's a whole number, right? If you put a negative in front of it, that makes it an integer. 2.7, a decimal, not an integer. Pi, 3.14 is a decimal, also not an integer. And 0, we did say yes, 0 is an integer, so therefore 0 would be considered an integer. Now what we're going to do is graph these on the number line. So hopefully you are comfortable with where numbers fit on the number line, right? And so take a look over here. We got 2 and 6. What's in between them? 4, right? So what's between -2 and -6? Well, if you said -4, you are correct. Okay, -4 is the number that fits between -2 and -6. -3 would go here, -5 would go here. So sometimes, you know, it's really helpful to kind of know where numbers go on the number line. What number goes here? All right, well, this one might be a little tricky, but we got -97. We got -100 here. Remember, as you move to the left, the numbers get smaller. The real question is what number goes right here, right? Well, it's not -96. -96 would be over here closer to 0. This would be -98. No, let's see. I had to move the 100 over for this to make sense. Otherwise, we wouldn't be dealing with integers. Okay, let's try this again. This is -97. This is -98. And what goes in between right here? If you said -99, you are correct. Okay, originally I had the -100 here, and then it ended up being a decimal, so I had to move it over. So -97, -98, -99 is going to be your answer there. Okay, what number goes in between -1 and 1? And this is very important because to me, this is the number where all numbers kind of stem from. This is the base number. Okay, for me, this is where everything begins. What's in between -1 and 1? If you said 0, you are correct. So I'm just quizzing you on kind of the number line and where the integers go. It's very important. It's very foundational in order for you to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. All right, here we got 19, then we got some number here, then 22 over here. Okay, so fill in the blanks here. This would be what? 1 less than 22 is 21. There's only one number between 19 and 21, and that is 20. All right, we've got one more going on here. Got a lot of spaces here. We got 77 here and 89 here. Let's count to see what happens. Let's make sure that these are evenly spaced about 1. 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. Okay, we said this was 83, right? 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83. So just count the spaces to make sure that they are integers like I did on the one example with the 100. Let's see, right there I had the -100 over here, and then it wouldn't have worked. Okay, it wouldn't have been -99. It actually would have ended up being a decimal, which we'll talk about in another lesson. So count these spaces to make sure -7, -98, -97, -98, -99, -100. Make sure you count them to make sure it works. You can't just assume that they're spaced about 1, so that's why I did that. So that's it. That is the lesson on integers and how to graph them. If you have any other questions about integers or whole numbers, let me know.